to the property lane where it's everything real estate. Once again, my name is Catherine Nanteza and I'm your host tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight we will be discussing property management in detail. I know most of you think, yeah, I know how to manage a property. I mean, just collecting rent and checking on tenants. But professionally, property management entails much more than that, especially where you're managing several units, where you're dealing with a landlord with a commercial property, or you're managing retail, managing very sensitive clients. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me. He is not new to you. For those who have been following us on Property Lane, you know we've been having these discussions with Moses, but he had disappeared. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lutalo Moses, the MD of Brawl Uganda. He's also MRICS, technically the most qualified agent in Uganda. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Catherine, for hosting me today. It's a pleasure to be back at the Property Land Show. Thank you for the humbling introduction. Lutalo Moses is my name. I'm the Managing Director of Brawl Uganda Limited. Brawl is part of the wider Brawl Property Group. We have presence in 14 African countries. Uganda is one of them.
Okay.
And we offer an array of services. Personally, I've been doing property services for the last 18 years. And I'm happy to share my experience with our audience and provide some input as a way of, passing on information that we think is critical for the audience to know anything about property management. Thank you.
Thank you. Moses, what is MRICS before we delve into property management?
Okay. MRICS is essentially a designation one gets when you stand for the highest sort of performance, ethical conduct within the real estate space. It's a charter holder, so I think in Uganda it might be about 35 charter holders.
Okay.
But specifically for what I do, I'm a chartered commercial property surveyor and specialize in commercial properties, retail, industrial, and hospitality properties.
Well, you will agree with me that with all those qualifications, we have the right guest for the topic tonight. What is property management?
Yes, Catherine, thank you very much. So property management as it is, or as many people know it, might rotate around certain facets, which are critical to what we do. And one of them is the financial management, where we collect rent and report to the landlords. The other one is the legal aspect, because we're advising people on the relationship between tenants and landlords. There's a procurement aspect to it, because you're buying services which are offered at the different properties. There is a technical aspect to it, because now you're dealing with machines, generators, lifts. Okay. And then there's a human aspect to it, because property and human beings always interfacing. So those are sort of the most important facets of property management. And every time someone talks about property management, it's not just about collecting rent. There's a team of people in the background who are delivering a service which is uninterrupted to the benefit of the users, occupiers.
Is property management the same as facility management?
Well, property management is a subset of facilities management, because then facilities management is a wider scope.
Okay.
It covers a lot much more than what typical property management does, because then facilities, you're dealing with a detailed bit of everything, whether it is food, whether it is accommodation, whether it is usage of space, planning of space. So broadly putting it, property management is a subset of facilities management.
Okay. I mean, we've had many of the landlords say, I will manage my property. I mean, it's about collecting rent. What's the difference between what they do and what the professionals do?
Again, depending on the nature of property, because if you have a residential house that you've built for investment and you have a tenant, maybe you can manage it yourself. But if you start putting up commercial properties, shopping centers, data centers, and all the sophistication within the property aspects, then issues to do with professionalizing how you offer the services to the users becomes very critical. Because unlike when you do it yourself, when you have a grade A building, for example, or grade B or grade A shopping center, it means the stakes are so much higher that you can't have one person doing all this. You almost need professionals, and that's why universities, whether it is MOBS or Makerere or Chambogo University, have been training graduates and trying to make sure professionalize, because it's an industry which is evolving very quickly, but also that requires professionals to deliver on. So if you're operating at a small scale, maybe you can do it yourself. But if you want to do it at a bigger scale in terms of investment, then professionalizing it becomes the natural course of action.
Okay. Before we delve into all that, what's the difference between managing, for instance, a luxury property, say in Kololo, with very sensitive clients, and maybe in a location that comes with its own nitty-gritties? What's the difference between managing such a property and managing an arcade downtown? Or they may not compare, but the difference between luxury apartments in Kololo and probably apartments in Nalia, how would you handle those two differently? Nalia, I'm looking at middle income, and in Kololo, we are looking at that top of the top, like in terms of status.
Yeah, I must say that probably being hosted at one of the most luxurious properties in Kololo, residential.
Okay.
But just to get back to that, I think the broader question is, what's the difference between managing a residential apartment block in Kololo, a condominium property in Nalia, a shopping center in Kampala, a commercial building, an industrial property?
Okay.
So in terms of the differentiation is basically the nature of property. And I want to start with apartments. So when you're doing apartments like we're seated here, these are condominium apartments. There's a Condominium Property Act 2001, which guides how you manage it. Essentially, it means the multiple owners who have bought into one scheme and they've come together to live together in perpetuity, sort of. So which means there has to be something that puts you together. And that's what the Condominium Property Act of 2000 sort of points out, that different people will create a corporate body, that corporate body will create a board, the board will manage the apartments or the development on their behalf. Now, that can be a commercial building or it can be apartments. Either way can be condominium. So when you're dealing with that sort of property and your property manager, you're dealing with a board who are the owners of the building. And what you're doing is to manage the common areas for them. Now, when you're dealing with a commercial property, which is don't...
Before you go to the commercial property, when you're dealing with like that board or the condominium association, how do you get paid to start with? Because there are multiple owners, and then you talked of procurement, you talked of all the maintenance and management of this property that has several owners. How do you handle that?
I think in terms of your interface as a property manager with multiple owners is to the extent that the owners of that development units must pay what they call condominium fees. Now, the condominium fees are a function of the managing agent fees and all the other associated costs, whether it's maintaining of lifts, whether it is cleaning of common areas, insurance of the building, security of the building, and all the other things. If you have services like swimming pool, steam, garbage collection, all that comes into that. So as a manager, every year you sit down with the owners, prepare a budget, they approve, and you operate that budget on their behalf. And I must tell the audience out there that until you do something like that as owners of a condominium property, there's always going to be a blame game between the developer and the owners. And you've had some of these cases coming up.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering, how do you maintain such a building, looking neat and spark like this? And then we are seeing the other buildings that could even be newer, but looking dilapidated and not well taken care of. And that's where you come in as professionals. Do you think they are not hiring the right agent, or they are doing it themselves?
Yeah. I think there's tendency of people wanting to do this for themselves, and they've found challenges because then you don't have professionals who understand how the Condominium Property Act works. But from day one, when you're putting up a development, whether residential, commercial, and you want it to be a condominium property, you have to align the management of that building once completed to the act. Because, for example, it tells you when you've sold either 50% of the units that you've built or 180 days from when you sell the first unit, whichever comes faster. So it means from day one, you must set up that structure. And the people who are buying into that scheme must know, over and above buying this unit, you must contribute monthly, annually to the common parts of the building.
Monthly, that's where the problem is, because most of us are buying apartments to run away from rent. And when you talk of monthly payments, you're reminding us of rent. How easy is it to collect that fee? Do we educate our buyers about these fees, or they are shocked into it when they buy?
Traditionally, people have not been very open about these fees, and most buyers get shocked. But increasingly, the market is opening up to these things. And what we do when we get involved from a broad perspective, for example, we educate the buyers. We make sure this is included in the sale agreements. The rules of, the condominium body are detailed. For example, the places will tell you don't need pets. So you can't bring in a pet when the rules say you don't have pets.
Imagine you bought already. I actually got a call from one of the people in the high end that had bought an apartment. The agent did not tell them that there is a no pet policy. And the agent had already been paid. And now the person wants to move in and their dog can't be let through the gate.
Well, that's an interesting scenario. But I think as professionals, the duty of care, we need to be able to tell whether landlords or buyers into these schemes that from day one, you set the rules and say, okay, in our complex, we'll not allow pets. Put it into writing. Let people sign off on this. So in those rules, you also tell them, we'll annually come up with a budget to contribute towards the common management of the facilities. Otherwise, you find developments that are newer, like you said, and they're being run down, partly because people don't know what they need to do, but even those who know do not want to pay these fees.
We are going to pause it right there. Dear viewers, I'm sure you're enjoying this. We are going to take a very short, quick break. And when we come back, we shall continue from where we stopped, talking about pets and that monthly contribution. We need to educate our public about that specifically, since apartments are taking over. See you shortly. Welcome back from that very brief break. We continue enjoying this topic on property management. I mean, who knew that property management can be this interesting? You were telling us about the pets policy. Now, as you talk about the pets policy, like how would you handle that situation? Because now the buyer was calling Area Uganda and they're like, I need my money refunded, but I paid an agent. And they didn't tell me about the pets policy. Is there a way of reprimanding and whatnot? Probably that's...
In that sort of scenario, I think the duty of care is on the manager or the owners to enforce. So if someone bought into a scheme and they had a no pet policy, they need to enforce that. There's nothing that you can do about that.
So do you return their money?
Well, if the buyer wants to walk away from the scheme, I think the decent thing is to refund their money, because they cannot, and as you can imagine, people get attached to these pets. So if someone's condition is I must live with my pet in my home, and you're telling me I can't do that, so what I would advise the landlord to do is to refund the money and then let the buyer walk away from that scheme. Yeah,
I've also heard, Moses, that the other challenge property managers or developers are facing is people buy these apartments once they're advertised and someone buys, and then they don't even come to pick the titles. Especially if they're buying from companies or very known developers, they don't come to pick their titles, they never check on the apartment, and they don't want it occupied. Like, I paid my money, what do you want from me? How do you deal with that?
Yes,
and what's the effects
from I think what we need to do as an industry across board is to educate in forums like this and many others, so that people know what the requirements of someone buying into a condominium property. Because if you know, and you know there's a board which is appointed to represent your interests, then the decisions of the board are binding onto the owners. So if the board says every month everyone will contribute $100, whether you occupy the apartment or not, you must contribute. Now, what the Act doesn't really come out very strongly on is how do you now penalize people who don't. And revisions can be done on the Act to make sure it's more robust, like in markets in South Africa. You know, those boards are very strong. For example, you cannot, if you live in an environment like this one, you own a unit, you've not paid condominium fees for a year, you want to get a tenant, the board chair of the management body has to sign off on the tenants agreement. If you're selling, you have to sign off. So it means...
Oh, if you're renting,
yes,
they have to
yes,
sign
so,
off.
Yeah, naturally, they would withhold that money from that. Because if one party is not, you know, bringing what is due to them, then the whole scheme is going to collapse. The lifts won't work, the generators will not work, which sort of devalues the property.
Okay.
So the very essence is that from day one, people must be educated on what they're getting into.
I like that policy. So it means that if you're going to sell your property, before you get the endorsement, you're given all your areas.
Yes.
Does that mean that in the meantime, you know, business goes on as usual? They just have to get you somewhere. So what if you never sell or you never let?
Well, again, in other markets, what I've seen, there are even more punitive, you know, ways of doing this. With AI and artificial intelligence, they can deny you access automatically. Because if you're accessing your development through, you know, which is access control, they just, you know, deactivate that. So you can't get into that. Or they can, you know, turn off your utilities. So there are ways that can be done, but you cannot enforce that if the law doesn't go that far in explaining how we should engage. So whatever we do has to be within the ambience of the law. But most importantly, the people buying into the scheme must understand, must appreciate, must know what the role is going to be in the whole grand scheme of the development, not just as an individual, but the overall, you know, setup of the development.
What other policies can we borrow from? I know Brawl has several branches across Africa. Are you also out of Africa?
Well, we're a Pan-African business, but we're in partnership with Cushman Wakefield globally.
Could you like compare? How is it done elsewhere? I mean, the challenges you're talking about. You've talked of South Africa. How is it done elsewhere?
I think I would want to probably draw my attention more into the Africa setup.
Yes.
And when you talk about Africa, the markets that have grown, the big markets, South Africa,
like
Nigeria,
Ghana. They say Ghana is the latest kid on the block.
So those are big markets.
Yeah.
And they're doing pretty much better than us because the real estate sector there is also developed. I mean, you find listed property funds building this. So when you're doing real estate at that scale, chances are that you've gone through the cycles of educating people, appreciating it, and attracting, you know, the real capital into the sector. So what we're seeing is Uganda, we might be doing badly right now, but given where our sector is in terms of development, we're doing something. I mean, we'll get there. You can't just leapfrog the whole process. Until recently, we hadn't had so many condominium properties coming up. I think from about maybe 2000, that's when we've seen developments like that coming up. So what they call sectional titles or condominium title properties is a new thing, and Ugandans are just adjusting to it. So as that boom is happening, we need to follow it with educating people, with creating the legal environment to support such investments, but most importantly, to get professionals who can manage that.
Yeah, in summary, what's the difference between managing a property in Kololo and then the one in Nalia? Where is the...
I think there's not a very big difference. It's just a question of expectations. So maybe in Kololo, the owners are willing to pay premium for certain service, which will not find in. So depending on the location of the property, but also the positioning, I can tell you that...
How about the tenants? It doesn't matter. Or the homeowners?
The homeowners, because the homeowners are the control of the asset. I mean, I manage some properties in Nalia, and the service you're getting here is the same service you're going to get in Nalia.
Is it because you still have the same kind of clients, the other side?
Not particularly, but the setup is the same because, you know, where you don't have a sound and steam, they'll pay less condominium fees, but when it's collected on time, then it's improving the service delivery. So for me, whether you're dealing with a property in Nalia or Nakasero or Kololo, the principles are the same. It's the expectations of the owners that drives how far you're willing to go. I mean, you walk into a development like this, you almost have concierge services, you know, but I don't need that in Nalia. But that comes at an additional cost. So these are things that you sit down and say, For my development in Nalia, maybe I don't need, full-time, reception services at night.
Okay.
But here they'll tell you we want it 24/7.
So you
because
have a full-time reception
Yes,
here.
working. Yeah,
What
it's
do
things
they
like,
do? Well, like they attend to calls
No,
that come in?
well, when you walk into a building like this, the reception is grand. So you want to be received, you want to be welcomed, you want to be asked what you're going to do.
But how do you even get to the reception? I mean, we were stopped at the gate. By the time you're coming to a place like this, when you enter the gate, you should be knowing where you're going.
Yes, but
so I'm wondering, what would the reception be
yeah,
doing?
increasingly there are other people, the service providers who are coming in to
okay.
maintain lifts, to check on water pumps, generators. So there's a whole back end sort of infrastructure that delivers that. So someone needs to usher them in case of an emergency, or you even get calls, and you need to attend to that.
Okay.
So that dictates the level, how far you're willing to go as a developer, which you can now tell your manager to handle.
Now, moving to commercial properties.
Yes.
Commercial and retail.
Yes.
What's the difference, by the way?
Okay.
Is commercial an arcade downtown, or is it Crested Towers?
Okay, in the context of professional services, commercial is anything which is offices.
Okay.
So when I talk about a commercial building, I'm talking about a building which has predominantly office setup. When I talk about retail, it's shopping centers, Village Mall, Acacia Mall. Those are now shopping centers.
Where do those downtown guys lie?
Now,
The Chikugo
for those arcades, bazaars, definitions.
Because
they
they're not offices. Really.
They're mixed use, because you find you have retail down, you have lockups, then you have some apartments.
Or hotel.
So those can be mixed use.
Okay.
But for our context in Uganda, I think anything downtown, we call them arcades. Yeah, we call them arcades. But professionally, they should be bazaars, mixed use developments and all that. Yeah, so, and there's a very big difference between managing a commercial building and a shopping center or retail building. And I would want the audience to, be very attentive on this. Okay. So when I'm dealing with a commercial building like Crested Towers, it's two-dimensional. I'm dealing with the landlord and the tenant.
Okay.
So the relationship is that. So anything, you're just a go-between. When I'm dealing with a shopping center, it's three-dimensional.
Okay.
I'm dealing with a landlord, with a tenant, and a consumer. The people who come to the shopping centers, who visit. So if I'm and that's why you see people specialize. Okay. Personally, I do commercial property. I don't do retail. I don't do maybe residential. Okay. And there's a reason. So when you're dealing with a shopping center, the services that you're offering, you're thinking about the consumers. How many more people do I bring into the mall? How quickly can my tenants convert them into sales?
When do you think about them, the consumers?
Yeah,
when
every
getting
day.
Tenants, or?
Every day, from when the development is being set up, to the tenant mix, to the leasing. That's why they tell you, in this mall, you can't have more fashion than this. You have to have a mix of fashion, of food, all that. Because you're thinking, when Catherine walks into a shopping center with her children, they'll go to a kids' play, they'll go for a cinema, they'll go to KFC and have a meal, that sort of thing.
So
there's a whole science around that, which doesn't really apply in commercial buildings, because you're dealing with office users. Okay. And most likely, the compatibility of user between office users is almost natural.
Okay.
But in shopping centers, that's why you have tenants having exclusive clauses. If I'm the anchor tenant in your mall, I'll tell you never bring another anchor tenant.
Okay.
Yes. So it's more scientific in retail.
What does that mean? That if I have MAC, I can't bring NAS or any other cosmetic?
It's really unique. But for example, if you have a franchise for MAC products in Uganda and you're in Village Mall, I can't get another person the same franchise to do that.
Okay.
So I have exclusivity to that product. Wow. But it doesn't, not all tenants, but the big ones who understand the game.
Like Nike and Adidas.
They'll try to, and also you want a shopping center that is balanced out for services that people want. You want to say pharmacy, you want to see a fast food restaurant, you want to say fine dining restaurant, you want to say cinema. Things that, because the whole science of a shopping center management is how much more traffic do I bring into the mall and what quality of traffic. So the quality is a function of property management. Is it clean? But
also you want to make sure when Catherine steps into the mall, she spends more time in the mall, thus spending also money.
Exactly, what we would call dwelling times. Okay. So I don't want you to come in and get out. That's why they lay out the shopping center such that if you want to come in and want to go to the maybe say
Empty.
butchery,
Okay.
it will be at the behind. So that as you're walking through, you're able to see all the
See
other
others.
shops. So if you have kids that walk into kids' world, they want to pick something. So things like that. So shopping center management is a little more sophisticated than your commercial property management because of that diamond. Otherwise, you need even to count how many people are walking into a shopping center.
Okay.
Because when you're marketing
You
it to
do
your
that
tenant,
daily, monthly?
daily.
Wow.
You have to report on the foot traffic, vehicular traffic, because when you run a campaign like maybe Valentine's Day, you want to be able to tell your consumers, guys, I brought in 200,000 people this month.
Okay.
The growth is, so you see those reports that are published, they always report on the foot traffic, into the malls. Okay. So which we don't do in commercial properties because, it doesn't operate like that. So that's the difference between the two. One is more scientific, more data-driven, and will even get more complicated with AI and technology.
In less than a second, can you summarize that? The whole property management.
Well, I think what people need to know out there, that property management is a profession that people are trained to do this. People go to school to do this work. So if you're an institutional investor or private equity, it might be worth your while to hire professionals because the industry itself has liabilities. For example, to be a professional services provider like property management, you must have professional indemnity cover.
Okay.
You're running people's money. You must have trust accounts. So doing it at that scale means if you had errant managers who are not delivering, there's recourse for that. You're covered.
Moses, it's always a pleasure to host you, and you're so knowledgeable. You have so much to give our audience. Hopefully we will be hosting you again as we discuss and delve deeper into real estate, especially looking at real estate out of Uganda. We would like to tap into your experience and expertise as Brawl that has many branches across Africa. Dear viewers, I hope you enjoyed your time and I hope you learned something about property management. See you next time.
The Property Line.